The night air on Arcanine carried a thin, metallic tang, the taste of an atmosphere not yet ready to cradle life. Generators hummed in the distance, drawing lines of artificial breath into the colony's lungs. But to anyone standing beyond the fences, it still felt like standing inside a machine pretending to be a world. Elias Coran had grown used to it, though he sometimes wondered if that faint, sharp taste was what loneliness might taste like if it could be distilled into the air. He tightened the seals on his work jacket and glanced at the horizon, where violet clouds bled into blackness. He had drawn night watch again. Officially, he was an engineer assigned to keep the defense grids functional, but manpower was scarce and duty often bent to necessity. The outpost was little more than steel walls, scattered domes, and a comms tower that leaned like a weary soldier. It was not the kind of place where legends ought to grow, yet the colonists whispered stories with fervor. They spoke of a figure who haunted the ruins beyond the barricades, an alien queen crowned in gold and sorrow. She was set to command armies, to weave terror with a word. Elias never gave those tales much thought. If the Empire had such a figure, she would hardly choose to linger on a half-formed rock like this one. Still, even skepticism has cracks. The first time Elias heard the whispers, he had been repairing a comm relay while two miners traded hushed stories over ration packs. They described eyes that glowed like starlight and a presence that made even the air tremble. One of them swore he had seen her silhouette among the skeletal remains of the old city that once stood here, before humans claimed the ground for themselves. Elias filed it away as exaggeration. Fear always needed a face, and rumor was the cheapest mask. Tonight, though, the colony was unervingly silent. Wind pressed against the metal plating of the wall with hollow groans, and every sound seemed to stretch too long. Elias walked his circuit, hand resting on the worn grip of his sidearm more from habit than conviction. His boots crunched over gravel as he passed the last floodlight and into the dim glow near the ruins. The derelict structures had once been alien dwellings, smooth arcs of stone fused with metals humanity had yet to replicate. Now they stood broken, half swallowed by sand. He paused. Something moved between the fractured pillars. Elias crouched, instinct tightening his muscles. A silhouette lingered ahead, motionless yet impossibly regal. Even at a distance, he felt its weight, the kind of presence that bent space around itself. For a heartbeat, he thought his mind was fabricating shapes from shadows, a trick of fatigue and rumor. Then the figure shifted, and moonlight spilled over her. She was tall, her skin a deep shade of violet that seemed to draw on the light rather than reflect it. Silver-white hair flowed down her back in twin braids, framing a face both sharp and sorrowful. Atop her brow rested a crown of gold set with stones that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Elias's breath caught in his throat. He should have raised his weapon, should have triggered his comm, should have done a dozen things drilled into him by duty. But he didn't. He simply stared. The queen, because what else could she be, stood with her head bowed. Her shoulders trembled, and from her eyes fell lines of light, tears shimmering violet as they traced her cheeks. They were not the tears of myth or manipulation. They were raw, unhidden, painfully human in their weight. Elias's first thought was absurd. She's alone. The second thought came heavier. She's grieving. He shifted, and the crunch of stone under his boot betrayed him. Her head lifted, and those luminous eyes locked onto his. They did not blaze with fury or command. Instead, they held exhaustion, the weary ache of someone who had carried too much for too long. For an instant, Elias felt as if she saw through him entirely, past uniform, past duty, into the hollows of his own solitude. Neither spoke. The silence stretched, taut and fragile. Elias's pulse hammered in his ears, yet his hand never rose to his weapon. He had faced skirmishes, ambushes, even the occasional desperate raid, but never had he stood before something that felt so utterly alien and yet so unbearably familiar. She turned away first. Her hand brushed the crumbled stone beside her, fingers trailing across it like one might touch a grave marker. The faint sound of breath escaped her lips, half sigh, half sob. Elias swallowed against the dryness in his throat. Every protocol demanded he retreat, report, prepare for escalation. Yet to do so felt like shattering something delicate and irretrievable. The colony's alarms did not blare. No hidden army surged from the darkness. There was only her, crowned and crying beneath a sky too vast for comfort. Elias took a single step closer, uncertain if courage or folly moved his legs. The queen did not flee or strike. She only looked back at him, eyes wet with the kind of sorrow that unmoors certainties. In that moment, Elias understood that the stories the colonists whispered were wrong. Power was not what defined her. Loneliness did. A cold wind stirred between them, carrying dust and silence. Elias felt the weight of a choice gathering in his chest, though he could not yet name it. All he knew was that he had stumbled upon something that could not be unseen, and whatever path lay ahead, it would no longer follow the predictable lines of duty. The queen lowered her gaze once more, and Elias realized he was holding his breath. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew this night would not end like the others. Something had shifted, fragile, but irreversible. And so, alone in the ruins with the alien queen's tears glimmering faintly in the dark, Elias felt the first tremor of a story larger than himself, a story that had only just begun. Elias did not sleep the next day. The image of her crowned, luminous, and crying haunted every blink, every breath. He told no one. To mention it aloud would invite questions he could not answer, and worse, orders he could not follow. The colony trusted in rigid protocols. If you saw an alien, you reported it, and the military handled the rest. But something inside him resisted that simplicity. She had not raised a hand against him. She had not summoned soldiers or declared her dominion. She had wept, and he could not banish the sound of it from his mind. Night drew him back, though he told himself it was curiosity, not compulsion. He walked the same patrol route, footsteps crunching over gravel until the floodlights fell away. The ruins waited like patient bones beneath the twin moons. For a long time there was nothing but silence, and he began to wonder if he had imagined it all. Then he saw her again, standing as if she had been carved from the shadows themselves. This time, when her gaze rose to meet his, she did not flinch. Her eyes lingered on him with a strange, measured patience. Elias's voice felt brittle in his throat, but silence pressed heavier. So he forced words out. "Why are you here?" The question trembled between them, simple yet vast. The queen did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned her face toward the fractured pillars, as though she listened to something beyond the range of human hearing. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower than he expected, rich yet subdued, like the echo of a bell in a cavern. "Because this is the only place I am allowed to break." Elias frowned, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Allowed?" She looked at him then, and for the first time he saw not only sorrow, but something harder, more dangerous, restraint. "A queen does not grieve before her people," she said. "A queen does not falter, does not tremble. But I am still flesh. I am still alone." The last word cracked faintly, as though it had fought its way past armor. Her admission struck Elias with unexpected force. He wanted to ask a dozen questions about her empire, her people, the wars whispered in human reports, but the sight of her shoulders, heavy under invisible weight, held his tongue. Instead, he said quietly, "Alone is something I understand." The word seemed to startle her more than any weapon might have. Her brow furrowed, and she studied him as though re-evaluating every assumption she had carried into this moment. "You are not alone," she said finally. "Your colony lives behind its walls. Your kind multiplies, builds, spreads. You are surrounded by your own." "Surrounded, yes," Elias admitted, "but that doesn't mean seen." A silence followed, dense but not hostile. She tilted her head, strands of silver hair catching the moonlight, and Elias felt the ground shift between them. Something fragile but real was threading its way into the space, not alliance, not yet trust, but recognition. Her voice grew quieter when she spoke again, more confessional than declarative. "I was given a throne before I was given time to mourn. My mate fell in a battle I did not choose. My children lost to the void when a fleet burned beneath your banners. I wear gold and stones, yet I cannot bring them back. And so I stand, I rule, I command as though I am whole." Her eyes shimmered, and a tear traced its way down, luminous against her skin. But in truth, I am not. Elias's breath tightened. He had known loss, though not on such a scale. The colony's records were filled with names erased by disease, by accidents, by skirmishes. He had buried friends in shallow graves under artificial skies. But there was a universality in grief, and hers reached across every difference of species and crown. For a moment, he did not see a queen or a symbol of enemy power. He saw a mother with nothing left to hold. The realization unnerved him. He had expected menace, perhaps even majesty, but not this shattering vulnerability. And yet it made sense. A figure so feared, so untouchable, could only reveal her fracture here, in ruins that mirrored her own. "You came back," she said suddenly, as if the thought had just occurred to her. "You could have turned away. You could have summoned blades to strike me down." "I don't know why I came," Elias admitted. "Maybe because I couldn't stop thinking about you, about the way you broke. I've seen soldiers fall, leaders rage, but I've never seen someone with a crown cry like that." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, more like a shadow of one. "Do not romanticize it, human. Weakness wears no beauty." "Maybe not," Elias said softly, "but honesty does." The words hung between them. She turned her gaze away, but he sensed something inside her tremble, as though part of her longed to believe him. He asked no more questions that night. Instead, they stood in uneasy companionship while the moons traced their arc overhead. She spoke a few words, fragments of her people's rituals of mourning, syllables that sounded like falling water. He listened, though he understood none of it, and in his silence she seemed to find some measure of permission to continue. When at last she withdrew into the shadows, she left him with a single parting sentence. "You should not come again. To be near me is to be marked." But Elias knew, even as she vanished into darkness, that he would return. Her grief had become a gravity of its own, and he was already caught in its pull. Back within the colony walls, he tried to anchor himself in routine, repairing circuits, adjusting defense grids, answering perfunctory questions with curt efficiency. Yet every hum of machinery, every flicker of light against metal, seemed too small now. He had glimpsed something vast, something wounded yet monumental, and the outpost's daily grind no longer fit around it. When sleep finally claimed him, it brought no rest. He dreamt of violet tears carving rivers through stone, of crowns that weighed heavier than any chain, of a voice admitting truths no ruler should dare whisper. He woke with the certainty that his life had tilted, subtly but irrevocably, toward a path no protocol could map. The next night, when his watch shift arrived, Elias did not hesitate. He walked past the last floodlight, heart beating not with fear, but with expectation. The ruins waited. Whether she would appear again he did not know, but the story had already claimed him, and retreat was no longer possible. Elias returned again and again after that, until the rhythm of his nights changed. What had once been a monotonous circuit of fences and sensors became a secret pilgrimage to the ruins, where the queen waited like a shadow stitched to the stone. Their meetings were never arranged, yet she was always there, as though she had known he would come. At first, their exchanges were sparse, fragments of conversation between long silences, but the silences grew softer, less burdened, until words began to fill them naturally. She told him pieces of her world, not the broad strokes of empire and armies, but the details hidden in corners, the sound of crystal seas under twin suns, the way her people once wove light into music, the scent of blossoms that bloomed only in the wake of storms. Elias listened, each description painting a place he would never see, yet somehow felt closer to with every word. When she spoke of rituals for the dead, of songs sung into the void so that the departed would not wander lost, he felt the skin on his arms tighten with recognition. Humans buried their dead with earth and stone. Her people buried them with stars. But grief, he realized, was universal. He began to share in turn. His childhood on a mining colony, the father who worked himself into an early grave, the mother who taught him to read by the light of sputtering generators. He told her how silence had been his inheritance, how even surrounded by voices, he had always felt unseen. She listened with an attentiveness that unsettled him, no dismissive nods, no perfunctory sympathy, but a gaze that seemed to take in every syllable. Yet beneath these confessions ran an undercurrent of danger. Elias knew the colony had begun to watch him more closely. His late-night absences had drawn murmurs, and the military officer in charge of security had already asked pointed questions. "You walk like a man hiding something," the officer had said, narrowing his eyes. Elias deflected, claiming maintenance duties, but the weight of suspicion pressed heavier each day. The Queen, too, lived under threat. One evening, her expression hardened as she revealed the truth of her station. "My council pushes for war," she admitted, her voice edged with bitterness. "They call me weak because I hesitate. They hunger for conquest, for vengeance against your kind. I hold them back, but only barely. To weep is to arm my enemies with proof of my unfitness. That is why I come here, where none but you can see." The words jolted Elias. Until then, her grief had seemed personal, private. Now he understood its scale. Her vulnerability was not only sorrow, but also peril. If discovered, her nights of mourning could topple her reign, unleashing a tide of destruction his colony could never withstand. "You risk everything just by being here," he said. "So do you," she replied evenly. "Do not think I am blind to the danger. If your leaders knew, they would brand you traitor." Her gaze sharpened. "Why, then, do you return?" Elias hesitated, searching for an answer that would not sound like madness. At last he said, "Because you don't feel like an enemy, and maybe because I don't want you to be." For a moment, her regal mask slipped, and something gentler flickered through. She looked almost startled, as if the thought had never been spoken aloud to her before. The nights that followed deepened the bond between them. He grew accustomed to the cadence of her voice, to the way her hands traced the stone as she spoke, to the rare flashes of wry humor that cut through her sorrow. Yet even as their closeness grew, the noose around him tightened. The colony's commanders increased patrols near the ruins. Drones hummed overhead with greater frequency. Twice he nearly stumbled into searchlights, heart pounding as he ducked back into shadow. His conscience began to tear. Duty demanded disclosure. Report her, alert the colony, ensure safety. But another voice, quieter yet fiercer, told him that betraying her would be more than treason. It would be murder of something fragile and irreplaceable. He found himself lying more easily, weaving excuses about malfunctioning grids or extended inspections. Each deception was a stone added to the weight pressing on his chest. One night, she confronted him with a question he had long dreaded. "What will you do when they discover us?" Elias faltered. "I don't know. You must know," she said, her tone sharper than before. "You stand between two fires. To serve them, you must betray me. To protect me, you must betray them. There's no path without blood." The starkness of her words left him reeling. He wanted to argue, to insist there was another way, but deep down he knew she was right. The colony would never permit such clandestine meetings to continue, not with the figure they considered their enemy's heart. And her council would not tolerate weakness once it was revealed. They were both living on borrowed moments. That night, as he returned to the colony, Elias nearly collided with the officer who had been shadowing him. The man's eyes narrowed and his voice dripped suspicion. "The ruins keep calling you. Will you find their engineer? Ghosts? Or something worth hiding?" Elias forced a laugh, feigning irritation. "Circuits don't repair themselves. You prefer the defense grid fail?" The officer studied him for a long, tense moment before turning away. But Elias knew the reprieve was temporary. The circle was closing. Back in his quarters, he sat in darkness, wrestling with the weight of choice. Report her and preserve his standing, or shield her and risk everything. Every argument collapsed against the memory of her eyes, brimming with unspoken pain. The confession of loneliness she had shared only with him. She was supposed to be his enemy, yet she was the only being who had ever truly seen him. By the time dawn's pale light seeped through the dome, he had made his decision. He could not betray her. Whatever consequences followed, he would carry them. The colony demanded obedience, but his soul demanded something deeper. Fidelity to the fragile truth he had found among the ruins. That night, when he returned to Versailles, he did not tell her of his vow. He simply stood near, close enough for silence to bridge the distance. But in his heart, the promise was sealed. He would protect her not as a subject guards a monarch, but as one solitary soul standing beside another. She looked at him then, eyes shimmering in the moonlight, and though no words passed between them, he felt she understood. The air grew sharper in the nights that followed, as though the world itself sensed a storm gathering. Elias noticed more patrols circling the perimeter, more drones humming restlessly overhead. The ruins, once silent save for the Queen's voice, now carried echoes of boots and the faint whine of scanners sweeping the dark. He moved with greater caution, slipping through shadows, but even as danger mounted, he could not stay away. She was always there, waiting as if her grief anchored her to the stones, and each night their unspoken pact deepened. One evening, he arrived to find her gaze fixed on the horizon. The moons lit the crown upon her head, though it seemed to Elias more a chain than an ornament. "They draw closer," she murmured without turning. "Your soldiers, my watchers, both sharpen their knives." Elias stepped beside her, the unease in his chest tightening. "What happens if they find us?" "War," she said simply. "They will claim I consort with the enemy. My council will tear the throne from me, and your commanders will turn these ruins to ash. Blood will write the end of this fragile silence." Her certainty chilled him, yet he forced himself to ask, "Then why keep coming here?" She turned at last, and her eyes glowed with something deeper than sorrow. "Because the burden cannot be borne alone. Even a queen must break where no one sees. And you," her voice faltered, then steadied, "you remind me that I am not only crown and command. You remind me I am still alive." The word struck him harder than any accusation. He had thought himself her confidant, perhaps her secret, but to be her tether to life itself was heavier than he had prepared to carry. Yet even under the weight, he felt no desire to let it go. The days in the colony grew restless. Rumors flared like sparks. Enemy scouts had been spotted, coded transmissions intercepted. Elias caught fragments in the mess hall, whispers of imminent attacks, commanders tightening their grip. The officer who had once shadowed him now watched openly, his gaze a blade at Elias's back. Every lie Elias told to excuse his absences frayed thinner, ready to snap. When he returned to the ruins that night, he found her seated upon a broken arch, her posture still regal despite the ruins around her. She looked at him as though she had been weighing something in his absence. "There is truth you must hear," she said. Elias braced himself, but nothing could have prepared him for what followed. "I do not weep only for my family, nor for the crown that binds me. I weep for what lies ahead. My seers, my intelligence, my own instincts, all speak of a single future. If war begins, it will not stop with my people or yours. It will devour us both. Entire worlds will choke in flame, and neither empire will stand when the fire is done. I carry this knowledge as I carry my crown, and it crushes me." Her voice did not rise, but the weight of it pressed against Elias's chest until his breath faltered. He had imagined her sorrow vast, but not cosmic, not grief for the death of entire civilizations yet to fall. "You're saying," his voice cracked, "you're saying this war ends everything?" "Yes." Her eyes glistened, but the tears did not fall this time. "And yet my council clamors for it. Your commanders prepare for it. Two blind titans rushing to embrace the abyss. And she pressed a trembling hand against her chest. "I am their queen, yet powerless to halt their march. That is why I cry here, human, not merely for what I have lost, but for what I know we are all about to lose." Elias stood motionless, the enormity of it swallowing every thought. He had feared discovery, feared punishment, but those fears seemed laughably small now. What she bore was not the sorrow of one being, but the anticipation of universal ruin. At last he whispered, "Why tell me this? Why trust me with it?" She looked at him with an intensity that stole his breath. "Because when I am with you, I feel I am not alone. And because if there is even a fragment of chance to avert this doom, it must begin with someone who sees me not as crown, nor as enemy, but as soul." For a long moment, the night itself seemed to hold still, as if the stars leaned closer to listen. Elias felt the tide of his life pulling him irreversibly forward. He could not promise peace. He could not undo centuries of blood. But he could stand here, beside her, and refused to let her bear it alone. Slowly, he stepped closer until he stood within reach of her trembling hand. "Then you won't be alone," he said, the words raw, unpolished, but unshakable. "Not anymore." Her eyes softened, and for the first time he saw something like hope glimmer in their depths. She did not thank him, nor did she smile, but the silence that followed was transformed. Less heavy, less suffocating. Shared. The ruins around them groaned in the wind. The colony's searchlights swept faint arcs in the distance, and war loomed like a storm above the horizon. Yet in that fragile circle of light and shadow, Queen and human stood together, bound not by treaties or armies, but by the simplest, most defiant vow that grief could be endured and perhaps, through companionship, transformed. Elias knew the path ahead would be perilous, likely tragic. But he also knew he could no longer walk away. Whatever came, betrayal, discovery, annihilation, he would face it not as a solitary figure patrolling fences, but as an ally to the woman the galaxy called its queen. The night pressed on, vast and uncertain, but for the first time Elias felt something stirring beneath the sorrow. Not victory, not safety, something smaller yet fiercer. The fragile beginnings of hope. The colony awoke to unrest. By dawn, alarms shrieked through the barracks and the comms tower spat out garbled transmissions. Patrols had sighted alien scouts at the edge of the desert, spectral figures glimpsed in the dust before vanishing like phantoms. Rumors swelled into certainty and certainty into panic. War was no longer a distant whisper, but a breath on their necks. Elias felt it in every wary glance cast his way, in every tightened jaw around the mess hall tables. He answered questions with practiced indifference, yet his heart hammered with each mention of raids or infiltrations. He knew the Queen had spoken true, the storm was coming. And while others prepared weapons, he carried the weight of her revelation like a stone lodged beneath his ribs. That night he returned to the ruins not out of habit, but out of urgency. She was waiting, her silhouette etched against the fractured skyline. There was no veil of sorrow softening her posture now. She stood as a monarch, proud and unyielding, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. "They gather," she said before he spoke. "My scouts watch your soldiers watch mine. Soon one side will misstep, and the fire will spread." Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then stop it. Tell them the truth. Tell them what you told me. That war will destroy everything." Her laugh was low, bitter, edged with despair. "Do you think I have not tried? My counsel calls me coward, dreamer, unfit. To speak of peace is to mark myself weak. They hunger for conquest, for vengeance dressed in glory. My voice is a single drop in a storm." "Then let me help," Elias said, surprising even himself with the conviction in his tone. "I can't sway councils or generals, but I can stand with you. Maybe together we can make them listen." Her gaze held him for a long, searching moment. "You are one man, a soldier of the enemy. Why should they not laugh or cut you down where you stand?" "Because I'll speak anyway," he said. "Because someone has to." The silence that followed was heavier than any words. At last she closed her eyes and exhaled, as though surrendering to a truth she had resisted. "You risk your life for me, human. Perhaps more than your life. When your commanders learn of this, you will be branded traitor." "Maybe," Elias admitted, "but I'd rather be called traitor than watch both our worlds burn." The wind stirred between them, carrying the sharp scent of dust and ozone. She looked away toward the horizon where faint lights flickered, scouts or search drones neither friendly. "If you mean this," she said quietly, "then what binds you is no longer duty to your colony. It is duty to me." The words settled over him like a mantle, heavy yet clarifying. He felt no hesitation. Then so be it. In the days that followed, the colony's suspicion hardened into scrutiny. Elias was summoned twice for questioning, each time facing the officer whose eyes gleamed with cold certainty. "Your patrol logs don't match the records," the man said, fingers drumming the table. "You disappear for hours. Where do you go?" Elias forced calm into his voice. "The sensors in Sector 9 keep tripping. I've been tracing the fault. You want the grid down when the scouts attack." The officer stared long, then dismissed him, though the doubt never left his expression. Elias walked out with his chest tight, knowing the facade would not hold much longer. When he told the queen of this, she regarded him with quiet gravity. They will uncover you soon, and when they do, their fear will speak louder than reason. Then we act before they can, Elias said. You told me war is inevitable if no one stops it. So let's stop it. Not with armies, with us. Her lips curved faintly, not in humor but in wonder, as if she had never imagined such defiance could come from one so small in the grand scale of empires. You speak as though the weight of galaxies can be shifted by two souls in the dark. Maybe it can, Elias replied. Maybe all great changes begin like this. The queen said nothing more, but her silence was no longer dismissal. It was consideration, and though the ruins stood quiet around them, Elias felt the world tilt closer to a precipice. One night, as they stood side by side, a searchlight swept over the ruins. Elias pulled her back into shadow, their shoulders brushing, their breaths caught. Voices echoed not far off, soldiers combing the ruins with heavy boots and sharper eyes. The queen's hand brushed the hilt of a blade at her side, but Elias shook his head fiercely. They stayed still, pressed close until the patrol moved on, leaving only dust in their wake. When the danger passed, she whispered, they will not stop. Sooner or later, they will find us. Elias met her gaze, his own steady despite the thundering in his chest. Then when they do, we'll face them together. Her eyes glimmered, not with tears this time, but with something harder, fiercer. Together, she repeated, as though testing the word. The ruins fell silent again, yet the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of grief, but of resolve gathering strength. Elias felt a coil inside him, an ember refusing to die. Whatever storm approached, he knew he would not face it alone. And though war loomed nearer with every passing day, he sensed something even greater rising beside it, not certainty, not safety, but a fragile, defiant hope. The storm finally broke. At dawn, the colony walls shook with distant detonations, dull thunders rolling across the desert like drums of war. Scouts returned bloodied and shaken, swearing they had clashed with alien outriders. The commanders wasted no time. The outpost bristled with weapons, soldiers lined the barricades, and drones spiraled into the sky in swarms. The fragile lull was gone, or had stepped out of shadow into flame. Elias felt the pressure of every eye. He carried tools across the compound, answered curt orders, but his skin prickled with suspicion that clung to him like smoke. The officer who had watched him for weeks now followed openly, as if daring him to make one misstep. Elias could feel the noose tightening, the inevitable moment when a secret would be dragged into light. Yet what haunted him most was not fear for himself, but for her. If the colony's forces swept into the ruins, they would not hesitate to cut her down, crown and sorrow alike. That night, he went to her with urgency pounding in his veins. She was already waiting, framed against the broken stone, her crown gleaming like a star fallen into ruin. But there was no softness in her posture now. She stood tall, every inch the sovereign her people demanded. Only her eyes betrayed the fatigue beneath the mask. They struck your patrols, she said before he could speak. Not by my order. My council acts without me now. They would tear command from my hands if I resisted. Soon they will not even pretend to heed my voice. Elias's jaw tightened. And my commanders believe this is the proof they've been waiting for. They'll bring the full weight of the garrison against you, against anyone they find in the ruins. Then the moment has come, she murmured. We can no longer linger in shadows. We must choose our stand. Her words trembled with finality, yet Elias heard in them the echo of the vow he had made, not to abandon her. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. Then we stand together, but not in silence anymore. If there's even a chance to stop this, we have to face them. Both sides. Her eyes widened slightly, as though struck by the audacity of the thought. You would walk into your commander's chamber and speak for me? You would risk being cut down as a traitor? Elias's throat felt raw, but he did not flinch. If I don't, they'll kill you and call it victory. And then your council will unleash hell in your name. There won't be a world left for either of us. The silence between them tightened, charged like the air before lightning. At last she exhaled, and for the first time her regal mask cracked. Not into grief, but into something close to resolve. Very well, we will speak together. Let them see not queen and soldier, not conqueror and prey, but two souls who refuse the abyss. The decision forged itself in that moment, sharp as steel. Yet the path it opened was perilous. Elias knew the colony would not listen easily. Fear had been their compass for too long, and fear rarely yielded to reason. But the queen's presence beside him, radiant even in sorrow, filled him with a steadiness he had never known. The following night, as tension spiraled, the inevitable confrontation came. Elias was summoned to the command dome under heavy guard. The officer who had shadowed him stood at the entrance, lips curled in triumph. At last, he sneered, "We'll have answers." Inside, the commanders circled a hollow map drenched in red markers. Their voices snapped with anger, planning counterstrikes, dismissing losses as inevitable. Elias stood before them, his heart pounding, and for a moment he faltered. Then the dome's doors opened again, and she entered. Gasps tore through the room. Soldiers raised their weapons, shouts rang out, but the queen did not flinch. She stood tall, her crown catching the sterile light, her violet skin shimmering like a wound and a warning. Elias stepped in front of her instinctively, his voice raw with urgency. "Stop. She's not here to fight. She came because she doesn't want this war. None of you see it. The destruction will consume both sides. She knows it. I know it. Listen before you condemn us both." The room fractured into chaos. Some commanders barked orders to fire, others demanded restraint, and over it all the officer's voice cut like a blade. "He's betrayed us. He brings the enemy into our heart." Elias's hand clenched into a fist, his voice rising above the din. "If you kill her, you end any chance of peace. You think this war will save us, but it will bury us. She stands here unarmed, alone. Does that look like conquest to you? Or does it look like someone begging to be heard?" For the first time, silence rippled through the dome. The queen stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of worlds. "I am not your myth. I am not the terror you whisper about in your bunkers. I am a ruler who has lost everything, yet I refuse to lose more. If you strike me down, my people will burn worlds in my name. If you listen, perhaps there remains another path." Her words were not plea but proclamation, a sovereign offering truth even in the jaws of death. Elias watched the commanders wrestle with disbelief, fear, the inertia of hatred. The officer's hand hovered near his weapon, trembling with fury, yet he did not fire. The moment teetered, fragile as glass. Elias felt every breath like a countdown, every heartbeat a drumbeat toward either massacre or miracle. He knew they had not won trust, not yet. But neither had the queen been silenced. She had spoken, and her voice lingered in the charged air, undeniable. When the meeting ended, no shots had been fired. No peace had been forged either. Only a pause, brittle and uncertain, but a pause nonetheless. For the first time, Elias allowed himself to believe it might be enough to begin with. As they left the dome together, soldiers watching with suspicion and awe, the queen leaned close enough for him to hear her whisper, "You have given me something my crown never could, time." Elias's chest tightened, and he nodded. "Then let's use it." The night swallowed them once more, heavy with danger, but beneath it ran a current of something new. Not safety, not victory, but the fragile possibility of both. And as Elias walked beside the alien queen, he felt the story they had begun was still only unfolding, its end unwritten, its hope alive.